Now, I want to introduce to you a great guy called Simon. Simon, do you want to run up? Or you can walk up, step up. Simon's a great friend of ours. He's from the northern suburbs, and I'm from the eastern suburbs. So I don't know if that makes... we're still friends. And Simon runs help groups and support groups for people struggling with porn, mainly for guys. And Simon's kind of got his own story as well that led him to actually wanting to do this. And we just thought it'd be great to hear him share some of what they do and some of the reasons why he does it, and some of the reasons or some of the effects that they see as a result of doing it. He is a magician, and so I'm just waiting for him to just kind of disappear or put on a red suit magically or something like that.
He looks more like a magician.
In case you didn't hear, he asked who looks more like a magician. Anyway, over to you, Simon.
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Simon Camilleri, and I'm going to share a little bit about Elephant Room and my story and how it led, how I got led to running it. But before I do, I was just wondering here, who was around or conscious or old enough to remember when the internet sort of arrived, hit the world? Here we go. Right, the hands. Very good. Very good. Now, I remember that time. I remember the ads that were on. I remember the there was like instructional videos about welcome to the internet. And I also remember these, the news reports. There were these news reports out at the time, I don't know if you remember, and they were warning about some of the dangers that they were noticing as pornography came on the scene. And one of the things they talked about was how easy it was to access bomb instructions. Does anyone remember that? I vividly remember them talking about bomb instructions. Of course, the other thing they talked about was how easy it was to access pornography. Now, I'm 36, I've lived about half my life before the internet, maybe BI, I don't know if that's a new term we can coin, and then AI after the internet. Although I was a teenage boy at the time, I wasn't that interested in blowing things up. So the bomb instructions didn't really interest me. But the fact they talked about that pornography was really easily accessible, that I was very curious about that. If anyone here is 20 or under, they might find why that's a bit odd to be, that it's a novel thing that porn is easy to access. But you've got to remember that before the internet, of course there was pornography, but it was hard to access and it was easy to avoid. The only sort of porn that I sort of knew of was either that section of the video store or that section of the 7-Eleven. And you knew it was there, and as a young guy, you might be interested to go there, but there's people around. You're not going to, hang around there and buy something and go to the counter and things like that. There's all these sort of awkwardness around it. But after the internet came on the scene, pornography totally was a game changer. Instead of porn being something that was difficult to access and easy to avoid, it became something that was easy to access and almost impossible to avoid. I remember us all talking about the spam emails that we all got and the pop-ups and the advertisements, and people were genuinely surprised that that pornography was so blatant and so in your face. To some degree now we've become desensitized to how much it is pornified in our society. Well, I didn't really get access to, I didn't get to explore this curiosity of mine till I got to uni, and there were computer rooms that were fairly they weren't monitored very well and everything like that. I'm sure today they're a lot more monitored. But at the time, they were just there and internet was a new thing. So I went exploring, and like a lot of people, looked at porn for the first time just out of curiosity to see if it really was that easy to find. And lo and behold, it was. In fact, there was a whole world of pornography, not just porn that I might have thought was there, but a whole world of pornography that I didn't even know was there, much darker and deeper than I ever thought. And I was incredibly unprepared for the impact it would have in my life. I was incredibly unprepared for the hold it would take and for how much I would start to go back to it again and again. Something that started out as just an innocent curiosity became to have its grip in my life. I think our society and the church and families were all very unprepared at that time. I became a Christian around the same time in my teens, and as my relationship with Jesus grew and flourished, this relationship to pornography deepened and deepened its grip in my life. And so having these two things, they created in me a real fracture, a real sense of hypocrisy, I'd lost a sense of integrity. I knew these two things couldn't live together, and yet I tried to make it work. I tried to sort of fight this relationship with pornography, and yet I didn't understand how much of a grip it had on me and why I kept going back to it again and again. This sort of fracture in my life created an isolation. Now, I wasn't in any way an isolated guy in terms of relationally. I had lots of friends. I was very enthusiastic. I loved magic. I loved theatre. I was getting involved at church, and you wouldn't know it at all. Those that knew me at the time didn't know at all that I had this dark part of my life that I was trying to keep compartmentalised. But that's the thing that porn does. It not only is done in isolation, but it also, so it feeds in isolation, but also breeds isolation as people feel disconnected, not just to each other, but also to ourselves. And as we feel like if anyone really knew what was going on, if anyone really knew what I was looking at, if anyone really knew what was happening in my mind or in my heart, then they would turn away in disgust. And so you keep all your relationships at a certain level. You never let them go too deep. You never ask too hard questions to them, and hopefully they won't ask too hard questions to you. Over this time, I didn't share this struggle with anyone. I wasn't. I didn't have the guts like Jason to actually go out there and speak about this out in the open. No, I hid it. I hid it from my friends, from my church, and from my girlfriend at the time, who then became my wife. I hid it from God, or at least I tried to. And I also hid it from myself. It was like I was wearing a mask so that thinking to myself, I can deal with this. I can be strong enough, just a bit more willpower, and I can handle it. Well, as many people know, that doesn't last very long. And the only way to break this isolation cycle is to short-circuit it. And so many guys, I have the privilege of ministering to guys who let me into their story and share their story with me and their struggle. And they break that isolation cycle. But for me, it was had such a big grip, and I prized that mask so well that it needed something a lot bigger. And so my marriage had been time and time affected by my porn use, and eventually it got to a point where my wife asked me to leave over it. And so when that happens, when your wife kicks you out over an issue, even whether it's porn or picking your nose, that's a big issue in your life. You can't hide it anymore. That mask comes smashing down. But you know what? I look back on that time, even though that was definitely the darkest and saddest time of my life. I look back at that time as a great time of God's mercy to me. Because when that mask smashed, that was the opportunity I had to share. It had been exposed. It was all out on the table now. And so I could freely not pretend that I wasn't struggling and that I didn't need help. And so I went and sought some sort of a support group. Now, there wasn't much around, and there still isn't, unfortunately. But I found this little support group right on the other side of the city, and I used to trek over to that every week. And it was in that place, in that company of men who all had a common struggle, where I found hope, and I found camaraderie, and I found understanding. And I could expose the lies that I was believing about myself and about sex and about women and pornography and speak the truth into it. And the thing I discovered there was that I wasn't alone. Pornography is all about lies and myth and fantasy. And one of the biggest fantasies in pornography is that you're the only one struggling with it. And so I learned that porn, far be it from just being I was isolated in it, but so many were going through the same struggle I was. In fact, I heard a speaker once say that porn in the church, and at the time he spoke about amongst guys, it was porn is the elephant in the room. And that phrase stuck in my mind. And I saw more and more it was true. That every time that someone would say, oh, what's holding you back? Or what's the biggest issue in your life? Many people would be thinking pornography. And so that's sort of why I started the ministry with that name, The Elephant in the Room. 3.5 years of being part of this group, I learnt that not just that I had to come out of this spiral of a relationship with pornography, but I grew into spiraling up into a deeper, a more genuine, a more joyous relationship with Jesus. And in 2010, I decided not just to short-circuit this cycle of isolation, but to reverse it. It was time to share my story. So I organised at my church to run an event for the guys to come along, and I was going to share my testimony, my journey with pornography, and I called that event The Elephant in the Room. And from that event, that was the catalyst for me to start a support group, to pass on to some degree some of the things I had learnt and the ways in which God had worked in my life. And now I've been running that for about 4 years and writing resources for churches, and it's a great joy for me to stand with guys who have a lot more guts than I did, and to provide them potentially with some of the help and the resources that I never had initially. If you're here and you're struggling, I really want to encourage you that the only way to break that cycle is to short-circuit it. And I encourage you to share and talk with someone, and you'll be surprised how much you're not alone. And you'll be surprised that there is help and grace and freedom out there for you. But I know some people here have come because they're concerned. They're concerned maybe for a loved one, for their husband or wife, or maybe you're a pastor here and you're concerned for your congregation, or you're a parent concerned for your children or your grandchildren. Well, one thing I want to challenge you is to think about, are you the sort of person that they would come up to and share this struggle with? Not only do they know that you would respond to them with grace and understanding and support, but are you fostering those sort of relationships? Those relationships that aren't just shallow like the relationships I had in my life, that are deeper, that are digging deeper, that are full of grace and truth. And yeah, are you? I said that in the 90s when the internet came, I was really unprepared for it. I think the whole of society was really unprepared for it. Like a tsunami that hit, porn has just flooded into our culture. And it's been 20 years. And I still think, to a large degree, we're very unprepared for pornography. And I think it's time that we catch up. So please be part of changing the culture where we can talk about this issue, and where we get resourced, and where we can address the elephant in the room. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Simon. I'm not sure what happened to my microphone there. It's just, it's so difficult to get up and share your story like that. And I just really wanted to honour Simon for doing that. So thank you.